Hey everybody, Marcus here. Our world is interconnected thanks to the internet and smartphones. There's no escape for anyone anywhere on the earth from this interconnectivity. Within 30 years, it'll be obvious that during the first half of the 21st century, politics began to reform worldwide around three separate intellectual factions, each faction representing the divided spirit of man as we transition from mental to integral consciousness. If you have not watched my video breaking down John Gebser's work, The Ever-Present Origin, wherein he presents his four-structure model of consciousness, you can find the link in the description. I will be making reference to these structures and don't plan on explaining them in this video. Now, the first of these factions is that of the traditionalist. Traditionalists will be known by various names with subtle differences between them, yet will be united in their general disposition towards reality and man's role in it. Traditionalists are past-facing. They gaze backwards at a world that worked, a world with order, stability, and certainty. They juxtapose that image against what they see playing out in front of them day by day. Today's world feels broken, chaotic, and unstable in contrast. They long for the past. They work to usher in the past once more, to bring into the present the perceived order, stability, and certainty in their imagination. And indeed, I do mean perceived, and I do mean imagination. For many who long for the past are too young to have ever lived it. Hence, they have no first-hand experience of what they desire to usher in, only perception from films, books, and stories. Others, who are old enough to remember it, suffer from the frailty of human memory. Who can really tell what they do remember? Perhaps only disjoint snapshots. Traditionalists are ultimately driven by fear and shame. They fear the future and therefore bury themselves in the transparency of the past. Yet the past was one governed by the religious tradition of shame. All Abrahamic religions begin with the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, and when man saw himself naked, he was ashamed. Indeed, guilt and shame are a key requirement of traditionalism, a key requirement often not brought up. Very powerful emotions without which no return to traditionalism is possible. Even the East, though not primarily influenced by the Abrahamic tradition, still cultivated a fallen, guilty, shameful image of man as imperfect being. Within the East, to bring shame upon oneself or family would traditionally necessitate some form of restorative practice. The Japanese practice of seppuku was indeed this, a form of restorative penance, mostly practiced by samurai, but was not restricted to them. The Japanese mafia, in turn, required one to sever a finger for every failure, namely, another restorative practice of recovering from shame. Though the traditionalist does not hate man, he is ashamed of man. Hence, man must be obedient to God as a restorative practice. Traditionalists carry in them a strong resonance to the deficient phase of the mythic structure of consciousness. The Old Testament, after all, is a product of mythic man. Mythic man was past-oriented and fundamentally feminine, matriarchal. And though traditionalism is stereotyped as patriarchal, this is not historically true. The mythic structure of consciousness prior to Christianity was matriarchal. There is no shortage of goddesses in myth, and they are, by modern standards, presented as strong, independent women who don't need no man. Goddess worship was mainstay, and the earth was uniformly referred to as feminine, Mother Earth, as it were. Patriarchal overtones only began to appear in the exaggerated characters of Achilles and Odysseus, and took a more prominent role in the West once Christianity became the dominant religion. Yet even within the Catholic faith, the only Christian faith up to the Protestant Reformation, we had and continue to have a good deal of Mary worship. In fact, many Protestants, especially evangelicals, are often critical at what they call the idolatry of Mary worship in Catholicism, an idolatry taking focus off of Jesus himself. The fact is, the restrictions on women in the past were put in place to spare women the horrific realities of the world that existed. Whether or not that was misguided is immaterial. We can see today what women do when all constraints are lifted. We no longer need to speculate. Today, woman worship is at heights never before seen in history. They are venerable, holy cows that cannot be held to account for any wrongdoing. In most cases, women are presumed incapable of wrongdoing altogether. In either case, the world today, in regard to women, is far more traditional than it has been in the last 2,000 years. Yet the traditionalist is only really interested in the 1950s American way of life. He is not interested in the 1000 BC way of life, or for that matter, the 1930s Great Depression American way of life either. Just the 1950s, and only the 1950s. Forever. The second faction are the transhumanists. They can also be called technocrats or eugenicists. This faction has firmly embodied the deficient stage of the mental structure of consciousness, the complete rejection of anything non-rational. This faction's primary emotion is resentment and hatred of man. Transhumanists erased God with metaphysical materialism and see their project as one of apotheosis, to become gods themselves. They are the Luciferians, ushers of the mark of the beast and end times in biblical tradition. Transhumanists were an inevitable consequence of the traditionalist perception of man as guilty and shameful. The transhumanist has transmuted his self-shame into resentment for man in general. This resentment turned into hatred of man, finally into hatred for a God who created a fallible being when he could have made man infallible. The transhumanist goal is to reforge man in his own image, correcting the mistakes of God. The transhumanist believes through technology derived from cold rationality, he can overcome death and return man to the immortality and paradisal conditions of the Garden of Eden, the very same garden he does not even believe existed. The transhumanist is the sin of pride manifest in flesh. He is a utopian thinker. His message can be very alluring. Like the narcissist, he has a deceptive but lovable facade, yet ultimately one rooted in a terminal unhealed wound. His shame has become pathological. Finally, there's the third faction, the mystic faction. In some sense, the mystic faction is not new at all. In another sense, only as of the last 150 years has it been freed from active persecution. This faction is populated with a motley crew of characters. These are the Druids, hippies, Buddhists, Vedic yogis, shamans, Christian and Islamic mystics. These are the Jewish Kabbalists and Rosicrucians, Theosophists, Anthroposophists, Hermeticists, Gnostics, Alchemists, Psychonauts, and all other esoteric paths. This faction also includes the witches, sorcerers, and countless other practitioners of magic. The astrologers and psychics also belong here. Crystal healers, Reiki practitioners, alternative medicine adherents, and monks of various flavors too belong in the mystic faction. From a more mainstream origin, the mystic faction includes psychologists like Carl Jung and philosophers like Jean Gebser and Alfred North Whitehead. From scientists, we have Nikola Tesla and Isaac Newton. This is a faction composed of those rejected by the deficient phase of the mental structure, either in part or in whole. These are the barbarians living just beyond the gates of rationality. A completely respectable scientist is one research proposal away from exile from this gated city. If he elects to study, say, climate change, he is allowed to stay. If his subject of interest, however, is telepathy, to the wolves he is thrown. This is a faction composed of those who believe in things that, well, create doubt in, and therefore a threat to, the materialistic rationalist reality so carefully curated by society. This is also a faction full of charlatans, grifters, quacks, and snake oil salesmen. But how could it not be otherwise when the subjects are themselves alien and opaque to the masses? Yet simultaneously, this is the faction filled with the most original and revolutionary thinkers, an intellectual vanguard. These are the people who see humanity's destiny not in the past, nor in the future, but in the present. They do not seek solutions in a mythologized tradition, nor in the metaphysical materialism and rationalism of the transhumanists, but in human consciousness itself. This faction is not subject to the guilt and shame of the other two factions. Mystic disposition towards man and God ranges from ambivalence to love. To the mystic, man is neither guilty nor a shameful creature, but a creation in God's image. Their mission is not to fear and obey God, nor is it to kill and replace God. Their mission is unity with God. This is the faction in which integral consciousness will find a home. It is not the faction of the religions of the past, however. It is a transvaluation of what man is. Man is not a body with a soul. Man is a soul with a body. It's the primacy of the soul, of consciousness in man, that shapes the disposition of the mystic. There are no strict political parties devoted to the mystic faction as of yet, but there will be. There will be, as they do not fit within the conservative, progressive model of the current two-party system. As more people become jaded of the ever-tiresome talking points of capitalism versus communism and tradition versus progress, so too the ranks of the mystics will grow, a completely different approach to solving the problems of modernity. Ultimately, the mystic faction will become the dominant faction. Past traditions were meant for a world very different from today. Implementing them now would have to be done at the end of a gun. Women are not going back to the kitchen. Their vote is not going to be rescinded. People are not going to be back in the pews every Sunday. All the traditionalists can realistically hope for is a macabre, zombified facsimile of the past. The traditionalist deficient mythic structure disposition was superseded by the mental structure for a reason. As for the transhumanists, well, their sin is pride. They will not create demigods with their machines or genetic engineering. They will create abominations, a fate worse than death. Anyone who believes they will transfer their consciousness into a machine and live forever severely overestimates human competence and severely underestimates the propensity for greed and deception of the faction selling them this immortality. Just ask yourself, if you pay a company to transfer your consciousness into a machine, what is their ongoing incentive to store your consciousness eternally? After all, that is the promise, immortality. The simple answer is none, unless, of course, like with social media, you become the product itself. The shift out of the mental structure into the integral structure will see transformations come into being in every facet of human life. A new politics is only one of the changes on the horizon. I know the world looks bleak to everyone. In many ways it is. To me, the darkness of the world appears like a melting down of the old into the prima materia, only to offer itself back to humanity to reforge once again into something new, something better. What would you do if you were sent back to caveman times knowing what you know today? Would you mourn the loss of the world or celebrate that everything is up for grabs once again? Thanks for listening. Go team.